All right. Hello again, Steve. The last time you were here, we had a dead heat, but again, a week later, a new poll out. What is that telling us?
Wow, it's a real horse race to the finish line here, and we have a change in the numbers, and quite a dramatic one at that. Last week, we were showing numbers that said that the NDP was behind at 46% to the Conservatives, or sorry, 43% for the NDP and 46 for the Conservatives. Now we have the reversal of that, where it's 47% for the NDP and 42 for the Conservatives. So a radical change in just a 7 day short period.
How unusual is it to see a swing like that? That's what an 8 point swing within subject to the margins, I guess, but
You
8 point
know, it's one of
swing.
those things as a pollster, you look at the numbers in every which way and sideways, and you try and find a reason behind the story. And it became immediately clear as soon as we look behind the numbers, the reason for that. So it is unusual, but there are reasons. And the two primary ones is the difference last week to this week in how young voters and females regard the Conservative Party and the change in voting intentions among those two groups. So we've seen a radical shift last week when we had this poll come out. 42% of females across the province supported the Conservative Party of BC. That's now dropped to 34, so a massive shift downwards in a short period of time. And then same with young voters, 18 to 34. We've seen the results go from 47% last week to 38% this week. Those are two strong cohorts of voters. You add it up to the total, and that's the sole reason for the shift. We don't see any other shift in the male category or in the 55 plus, which is a strong voting segment, but those two drops. And it really, you look at some of the reasons. Healthcare has been a central part of the debate. And there was a bit of a flip this week where the NDP's messages seem to be getting through in that most British Columbians feel that the NDP does a better job in healthcare than what Rustad's party is able to provide.
Right. That's interesting because you were saying last week, Steve, that it's unusual for a center-right party to be performing as well as the Conservatives were with women and young people. So does this put them back more closely back to the range of where you'd expect them to be?
Exactly. The last two times we've talked, I've said that usually that gap is about 10 to 15 points, and we're right in that range now. So back to where historically we've seen those gaps in age and gender, and more along the lines of what typical elections have been, whether they're federal, conservative versus liberal, or provincial. We've seen that number many times before.
As you say, people trust by a wide margin EB on healthcare and to some extent on housing and affordability, whereas they trust Rusted on the economy. So strikes me that they're both going to have to try to eat into each other's margins in those areas to some extent. Is it like
Well,
where can
that is
Rusted go
exactly
now?
true, and I think that's where the Conservatives fell a little bit short. They had it to them on a silver platter because housing prices and inflation are two of the top three priorities next to healthcare. So they have a concerned public on a topic that they have been traditionally seen to do better at, and yet they let the NDP take the agenda and really make healthcare the predominant headline. You've seen the attack ads, Harold, where there's a part of the province that's finding those claims believable that the Conservatives are going to cut healthcare. They're going to have a $4 billion cut, and I guess the voters are buying it.
Right. Even though we did fact check that in our paper, and of course, that's not exactly what Rusted said. The looking take for a moment, we can spend a bit of time on the Greens. I know they're down at 9%. I thought it was interesting that at least a third of their voters, 1 in 3, see that they're somewhat likely at least to switch their vote. So there's maybe some votes to be gotten there. Not many.
Absolutely. We've talked about this throughout the campaign that the number of undecideds in this election is quite small. It's been around 10, 11. Now it's down to 8%,
Mm.
which is very, very tiny and relative to previous elections. We have the Greens that are dropping another point. And as you pointed out, that they have the least strong vote intention. So in other words, voters are saying, yeah, I'm going to vote Green, but there's a possibility I may change my mind. And if you look at the number of ridings that they're running in, we know that that is going against the Greens. They don't have a full slate of candidates. What is it? It's something like I think it's about two-thirds of the ridings have a Green candidate.
Right.
69. So 2/3 of ridings have a candidate that's actually available on the ballot. So the question is, what does that 2 or 3 or 4 points do on the Greens? Do they just not vote? Do they, in essence, throw away their vote by not voting, or do they switch and go to, which would typically be an NDP vote? And if that's the case, then we'll see the actual polling results on election day turn out even a little bit more in favor of the NDP.
Right, because as you say, I mean, while the Greens are up in the third of voters who might change their votes, the NDP and the Conservatives are down around 12, 13%. So their vote is much more committed, I guess, at this
Yeah,
point.
as we get closer to election day, we've seen a strengthening of the vote intention. So the likelihood of us switching votes has diminished. And in fact, we may have seen the Conservatives at the maximum level that they're going to be. It's not going to probably fall any further because the likelihood of people switching their votes at this point is actually quite low among those party supporters. But NDPers, on the other hand, their vote is a little softer. So in this past week, if we've seen those female and young voters switch over, there's not an absolute certainty. There's still some part of them that could change their mind, which makes the last week, tonight's debate night and the rest of the election week, depending on what happens, really it's still anyone's game.
Right. Well, that's great. Well, thanks for this, Steve. Thanks for the update, and we'll check in with you again in a week's time.
Excellent, Harold. Thanks.